Shalom Aleichem. We're going to continue learning the Chatzar Yosef. We are studying the Sefer that we wrote, Baruch Hashem. Here's a copy of the new version that we're trying to distribute. If anybody's interested, you can email me at my name, the first name and the last name at gmail.com. We would love to arrange that. We are going forward. We finished chapter 6, chapter 7, and now we're going to start chapter 8. From the beginning today. We're on page 77 in the book. And the title of the chapter is called Jerusalem Withering, because it's going to discuss the contents of what's going on inside the walls of Jerusalem during this time of the Second Temple era, towards the end of the Second Temple era, during the wars and the siege that the Romans laid upon the city. We're going to read the English part of the Gemara. Rome then sent Vespasian, Caesar, right? In Hebrew they call him Aspasianos Chatzar. Chatzar is like a surname, like we said, it's a title that's added to every Roman general. They sent him against what was at the time called Judea. Judea is the southern portion of the land of Israel, where Jerusalem is in there. He came and he laid siege on Jerusalem for 3 years. 3 long years. There were those 3 rich men in Jerusalem. Naktimon ben Gurion, ben Kalba Savua, and ben Tzitzita Keset. This is their names. These 3 rich men that were inside Jerusalem. The first one was called Naktimon ben Gurion. Why? Because the sun Nakda, which means pierced for his sake, pierced through the clouds, so to speak. The sun came out for him. And that's based on a very famous story, right? His name is Nakdimon, where the word Nakda is the root of that word, of his name. Did I bring the story here? I believe I did. We're going to bring it down later on in Rashi. We'll explain the story of Nakdimon ben Gurion. Very famous story. Okay. That was the first one. The second one, his name was Ben Kalba Savua. Why was he called that? Because anyone who entered his house starving like a kelev, which is the root of the word kalba, which is his name, would leave. They would leave his house, savua, which is also in his name, and that word means satiated. So they came hungry like a dog, and they left satiated. Ben Kalba Savua. It's all hinted in his name. The third one was called Ben Tzitzita Keset, because his tzitzit, right, the tzitziot, the fringes that we wear, on his the fringes of his garment, would drag upon kesatot, which means cushions. Keset is his name. So his name is Ben Tzitzita Keset, the one whose tzitzit dragged on cushions. That's how rich he was. He never was on an actual floor. It was always cushions. Some say, however, it was because his keset, his cushion, or his seat, meaning where he would sit, was placed between the greats of Rome, amongst the high authorities.
This is just what they called them?
Yeah.
Not their birth name.
Probably, yeah. This is not their birth name. This is what they were called, what they were known as in the community. Look at note number 4. There's a version of the story that says that he Ben Tzitzita Keset, sat amongst the greats of Jerusalem and not Rome. Because if he sat amongst the greats of Rome, why would that make him such a prominent person? It would make him a prominent person, but there's a machloket between the texts, whether it was Jerusalem and Rome. Maharal, however, as we're going to bring in the Amadei Chatzar section, suggests that both are true. So he was high up with both the Jews and the Romans. Gemara continues, one of them said to the others, I will sustain them with wheat and barley. Because remember, they're sieged by the Roman army. Anyone who leaves will be killed and crucified. So they're stuck inside. So he said, don't worry, I'm going to donate and sustain them with wheat and barley. The Jewish people who were inside. And the other one said to the others, I will sustain them with wine and salt and oil. And the other one said, I will sustain them with wood. So they're all donating something. And the rabbis praised the one who gave the wood, as Rav Chazda would give all of his keys to all of his storehouses to his servant, except for the one for the wood. right? So Rav Chasda had a bunch of storehouses that held a bunch of resources. You know, he had wheat, barley, whatever it was, oil, wine, but also had wood, firewood. He gave all the keys, he would entrust all his keys to his servant for all the different storehouses that he had, except for the one that had wood. Since Rav Chasda said, a storehouse of wheat requires 60 storehouses of wood. That's what the Gemara says. That's why wood is so important and so valuable, and that's why he wouldn't entrust his key to the wood to his servant. Because a storehouse of wheat, one storehouse of wheat, requires 60 storehouses of wood. We'll see what that means. The Gemara says they had enough resources, thanks to these three rich men, to sustain the city for 21 years. They could have lived for 21 years. They would have definitely outweighted the Romans, because the whole thing was the Romans weren't able to get through the walls. They weren't able to get through the walls of Yerushalayim. There was 3 layers of walls. At first, they weren't able to get through. So, actually, if I remember correctly, I think you sent me recently that thing on Shabbat, where it explained the 3 layers. They broke through the first 2 layers, but the 3rd layer they couldn't break through. They're next to a very big fortress over there. Fortress of it's called Antonia Fortress. They weren't able to break through that one, and that's when they laid siege on that part for 3 years. The Jews could have survived for 21 years inside. There were the Bar Yonim, however. Bar Yonim. Who are the Bar Yonim? We spoke about them before in a previous lecture. They are one of the factions, one of the groups of Jews inside Jerusalem, one of the political groups. They're also called zealots because they're very passionate. The sages said to them, to these Bar Yonim, let us go and make peace with the Romans. Right? The sages, the Chachamim inside Yerushalayim wanted to negotiate, wanted to be diplomatic, save as many lives as they could. But the zealots, the Bar Yonim, did not allow them to do so. The zealots said to the sages, let us go and make battle with the Romans. Let's fight them. They need to be put down. They need to be destroyed so they don't bother us anymore. They were very passionate. The sages said to them, the matter will not be successful, meaning we have no chance to beat them in actual war. The zealots, what did? The Bar Yonim, they arose and burned down the storehouses of wheat and barley. They burned it down themselves because of the infighting, and then there was a famine. And that's what caused the situation to get very dire inside Yerushalayim. Unfortunately, because of these Bar Yonim. Rashi now says, breaks down the word nakda. Nakda, we said, means it pierced, describing Nakdimon ben Gurion. This term means that the sun pierced through the heavens and shone specifically for him, which is referring to a story in Masechet Ta'anit. We bring the story down in the note number 5. Masechet Ta'anit, on the very bottom of 19b, goes on to the next page there. In short summary, we'll give you a summary of the story. It says over there that one year there was a drought and there was no drinking water for the Jews who were making pilgrimage to Yerushalayim on the Chag, on the festival. Right, 3 times a year they have to come. They came, but there was a drought, there was no water to serve them after such a long journey. So Nakdimon borrowed large numbers of springs of water from the Gentile overlord. Right, at the time there was a Goyish government ruling over the land, and he borrowed a lot of water from him, and he promised that he would return the water in the form of rain, or that he would pay him in silver for it. Meaning, if the rain doesn't come, he says, "Don't worry, I guarantee I'll pay you back in silver." They set a deadline for when it was supposed to rain up until, and the day of the deadline had come. So they waited and waited. The day came, and no rain was present. The whole time, it was that serious of a drought. The overlord ordered repayment in silver. He said, no, pay up. But Nakdimon claimed that he had until the end of the day. He says, today is the deadline, but today is included in the deadline. Today has to finish first, then I owe you. And that was defined, let's say, by sunset, before he had to pay. This happened several times as the day progressed. And he kept telling him, no, pay me. He said, no, wait, I have till sunset, pay me. till sunset. It didn't rain for a long time. It's not going to rain now out of nowhere. Pay me up. He says, no, I have till sunset. This happened several times as they progressed, and towards the end of the day, right before the sunset, Nakdimon entered inside the sanctuary of the Beit HaMikdash to Hashem, to pray to Hashem. And the clouds rolled in, and rain gushed so much out of nowhere, even more so than what was promised as payback originally, filling up all the pits and reservoirs that would collect rainwater. It was so much rain, it gave him back everything plus more. Nakdimon then approached the overlord and he demanded payment from him for the excess water. He says, no, I brought you the water plus more. Pay up. But the overlord said that the excess water was a result of rain that occurred after the deadline. It says, hold on, I'm not paying you for the excess water. Why? Since the day had already ended. I mean, the sun already set. He's saying all that extra water that came, it happened after the sun set, after deadline, after our contract is over. Nakdimon, what did he do? He prayed again, because here's the point. When it's really raining a lot, there's clouds everywhere, you can't tell where the sun is. You can't tell if the sun set or not. Right? And even after the sunset, there's still some light. It takes time before what we call Tzidkul Chavim, the stars come out. So he's saying the sun set already. He's claiming that, but again, it's very cloudy. What happened? Nakdimon prayed again, and the clouds cleared up, revealing the shining sun that had miraculously not yet set, which was according to time was supposed to be set. But God kept the sun up, and He cleared up the clouds after the second prayer to show that the sun is still up, and in order for the goy to pay Nakdimon for the excess water. So not only did he bring the water, he also made money on top of it. This was what Rashi is referring to, that the sun pierced through the clouds and shone for him when it was not normally supposed to do so. This story is Nakdimon's namesake. I tell you guys' name, right? Nakda, Nakdimon.
But he's not the one who brought the rain.
His prayer brought it. Okay, obviously he's not God, but obviously he's not. But the point is that because of his merit, it was brought. You understand? Because of his merit. Obviously, a person can't make it rain. A person can only ask God to make it rain. And the point is, after such a long drought, it's attributed to the person who prays for it. Okay, that was the first Rashi. Next Rashi, what does he say here? Next page, now 78. Would drag upon cushions. So we're talking about Ben Tzitzita Keset, who is Tzitziot, according to first opinion, dragged upon cushions. Why? Since he would walk only upon silk cloth. That's how rich he was, says Rashi. Note number 6, the Aruch, another important commentator on the Gemara, what he did was he wrote like a dictionary on the Gemara, a commentary dictionary on words in the Gemara. Very interesting. He writes that when he would walk from inside his home to his courtyard, right, talking about Ben Tzitzit Keset, his tzitzit would drag only on pillows and cushions rather than on the ground, which would happen with laymen, right? Because meaning even his outside, his courtyard was clad with, cushions and silk. Next Rashi, some say, this is the second opinion to explain Ben Tzitzit Keset, his name was Ben Tzitzit. And why was the rest of his name a keset, which means the cushion? Because his seat was amongst the greats of Rome when he would go visit the Caesar. So we would explain that, but that explanation was from Rashi, so I preempted the Rashi. The Baryonim, Rashi says, these were the zealots, the passionate ones, who were empty people who haste for war. That's how Rashi explains it. Note number 7, the Yavetz adds that they were lawless people, savage people, like wild animals of the field. Yeah. So in note 3 of the Chatzar Yosef of the previous section, over there we explained the 4 different factions of the political, scene that was going on at the time, and the Baryonim are one of them. Now, last Rashi, burned down the storehouses. That means they burned down the storehouses of the produce and the wood, says Rashi, in order to give their opposition no choice but to go to war. they were trying to force them to go to war because everyone else was saying, why should we go to war? We have plenty of resources because we could outlast them. The Bar Yonim said, yeah, that's what you want. They burned it, which put them in a situation where it made them have to go to war. There's no other alternative. Either die here of starvation or die in war.
With the four factions, what was the percentage? Like how much
I'm not
percentage?
sure. This, I don't know. Each one was a significant percentage. It's not like 50, 50 49, 49, 1, 1. I think it was a pretty split. Okay. So this last Rashi should have really bothered you, because the Gemara. We're going to mention it in the. We're going to mention it in the questions, but this last Rashi would have should have bothered you what he just said. Let's see the Shara and Chatzar question section. A lot of questions. Number 1, why was the siege 3 years long? Simple question. Why did Hashem make it like that? Exactly 3. What is the significance of these 3 wealthy men that are listed in the Gemara? And how do their names portray this significance? Because the Gemara keeps talking about their names. Why were there only 3? And why did each one of them offer specifically the resource that they did? Right? Each one of them said, I'm only giving you this. I'm only giving you that. Right? Wheat, barley, wine, whatever it was. Next, why was the wood praised most by the rabbis? They said that's the best one. That's the best resource. Why? In what sense does Rav Chasda mean that a storehouse of wheat requires 60 storehouses of wood? That was the reason that he gave why wood is so important and special. Because a storehouse of wheat requires 60 of wood. What does that mean? Why did Rav Chasda choose to demonstrate his point that wood is the most praiseworthy source by saying that 60 times more wood is needed for the same quantity of wheat rather than any of the other resources mentioned, like barley, oil, wine, or salt? Right? He connected the wood to the wheat. Why? Why not the others? What is the depth that Rav Chasda is teaching, and why does our Gemara present it in a manner pertaining to the keys to his storehouses specifically? Why mention the detail? He had so many keys, and the key for the wood storehouses he wouldn't give to his servant. What does that detail do for me? What is it teaching me? Lastly, our Gemara states that the Bar Yonim, the Zealots, they only burned the storehouses of wheat and barley. That's what the Gemara says. Look at the words of the Gemara. It says they burnt the storehouses of wheat and barley. Yet, Rashi writes in the last comment here that they also burned the wood storehouses, even though our Gemara makes no mention of it explicitly. How can this be reconciled? How do we understand Rashi over here? The Gemara said that wood was the most important resource. Yet, when it comes to tell us what they burnt, they tell us that they burnt the wheat. If they also burnt the wood, which was so important, wouldn't the Gemara mention it instead of the wheat? So the Gemara doesn't, but Rashi does. Rashi says, oh yeah, it was wood. They also burnt the wood. Why? Why is it like that? That's our question. Okay, we have some time. Baruch Hashem, we're making good time. So, by the way, I didn't mention that this chapter has a few sections, kind of like in chapter 6. So right now we're studying section 1 of chapter 8, and I believe there's 2 sections in chapter 8. Yeah. This section 1, by the way, I didn't mention the title. I should have mentioned the title, but it's called "Fuel on Empty." And the way the titles work is that when you read the title, at first it's hard to understand what it means, but once you get to the end of the chapter or the end of that section, it becomes clear. Okay, we're going to start the Amudei Chatzar section. It's a few pages. Maybe we'll get through most of it today. First, commentary. The Maharsha. Says the Maharsha, these 3 rich men were great indeed. Naktimon was great in that the sun pierced for him, as we explained before. Ben Kabasavua was great in that his bread was always available for all. And Ben Tzitzit Keset, in that he was very scrupulous, very careful with the mitzvah of tzitzit. As the Torah says in reference to the tzitzit, in order that you shall remember and perform all my mitzvot. Right? It's in the Shema. Hold on. Uzkartem and kol mitzvot Hashem. That's the point, right? Uzkartem, you shall remember all the mitzvot of Hashem. That's in the Parashat Tzitzit. So he says that if that was part of his name, that means he was very careful with all the mitzvot. And according to the other opinions in our Gemara, that his seat was amongst the elites of Rome, his name means that he was so great that he had the power to influence and to make peace with Rome. What prevented him from doing so, however, were the zealots, the Baryonim.
How do they prevent them?
I don't know. Maharsha just says it matter-of-factly. I guess he means that they were his obstacle. They were in his way. They didn't let him negotiate with the Romans because the Romans just didn't want to because of the zealots.
Sabotage them.
Sure, they probably sabotaged, and also the Romans may have said, "Listen, we're not going to negotiate with you as long as you have that group of people," because they were real, pains in the neck for Rome. Thus, because of the hatred between each other, the people had, the destruction and the exile resulted. The reason the sages did not want to wage war like the zealots did was because the result of war was already decided centuries before in the exchange between the forefathers of these two nations of Israel and Rome. Who are we talking about? Namely, who's their forefathers? Yaakov and Esav. Since Yaakov had said to Esav in their encounter, when they finally met, Yaakov and Esav met, he said, what did he say? Let my Lord please pass before his servant. This is in Parashat Vayishlach. After Yaakov runs away with his family from Laban, he meets Esav, he sends him all these gifts, right? He prepares for war, and when they finally meet, Yaakov talks to him very, very, like we say in Bachar, Shmo, very carefully, and he calls himself your servant to Esav. Honorably, sure. He calls himself as a servant to Esav, and he says, "Let my servant please pass by you safely without any problems." And once he did that, says Maharsha over here, that he sort of sealed the fate for his future generations, at least temporarily, at least in this point in history during these wars. Look at note number 3 on the bottom. Bereshit 33:14 is the source. Yaakov says, "My Lord," referring to Esav, and his servant, referring to himself. See commentaries there that explain that Yaakov was mistaken for belittling himself thus in front of the wicked Esav. He was not supposed to say this. He was not. You have to remember, he's a Gadol Ador. He's one of the pillars of the world, and he's calling himself the servant of a savage, violent person like Esav. It was too far, and for that, his children got punished at some point. That was a drop of the ingredient of what resulted here, according to Maharsha. Iyun Yaakov says next. Chacham. He says over here, based on the Gemara Masechet Sotah 10a. What does it say over there? I'll just give you a background. No, number 4. The Gemara there speaks of a Sotah. What's a Sotah? A woman who is a suspected adulteress. Her husband suspects that she may have basically had relations with another man. So if she's suspected and let's say she's really guilty, she drinks special bitter waters that are prescribed for her by the Torah, that the Kohen gives to her at the Beit HaMikdash. And if she was guilty, she's supposed to die, a gruesome death. However, the Gemara talks about there that she may not die right away, she may instead slowly wither away and die 1 or 2 or 3 years later. So we didn't get up to that yet in our Sota class, but you'll see.
She's guilty.
Yes.
She drinks the water.
Yes.
It happens to her. So
she'll get sick.
She'll get sick. She's gonna explode. Whatever.
Yeah.
So to the whole world, she's innocent.
You're right. So the Gemara speaks about this, and you'll have to see. You have to see in the Gemara when we get there. It's a few pages later. But the point is, what is it that could delay her death?
Some merit that she has.
Exactly. Due to a certain zchut, merit that she may have. such as giving tzedakah or something like that delay her death. So, and this is a real concept. We have pesukim that say tzedakah tetzil mabit. Tzedakah saves you from death. That's exactly. I think the Gemara is going to quote that in that verse. The problem is also God's name was erased. Does she go back to her husband? So again, we have to see this in the Gemara. This is not a Chatzar class. These are very good questions. We'll see. Okay, so now the Yaakov brings his Gemara. What does he want to tell us? There are certain merits, he says, that can delay divine punishment for 1 year. Certain merits can delay it for 2 years, and some for 3 years. Right? As the Gemara speaks about there in Sotah. Different mitzvot can delay the punishment. In our Gemara, the Roman siege of Yerushalayim lasted 3 years rather than an immediate invasion and just destruction. Right? So it was delayed. There was a 3-year delay. Why? Says the Yaakov. It was due to the merit, the zechut of these 3 great men that our Gemara speaks about, whose zechut, their merit, delayed the punishment 1 year for each of them. Because there was such body tzedakah, they gave tzedakah. That's a real thing. Tzedakah saves lives. It's a straight pasuk. Shlomo Melech writes it. Tzedakah tetzil mabit. Just like by Sultan here as well. That's how the Yaakov says. Okay. Next commentary. Orach Yesharim. This is written by Rabbi Menachem Tzvi Taksin in the 1800s, 1850 to 1918 was his life. He writes over here that each of these 3 men, our Gemara speaks about, were very righteous and each exemplified a certain pillar of goodness. Nakdimon exemplified the pillar of service, avodah, service of God and prayer, right? Because we know explains over here. I should just stay quiet and read. It says everything here. The pillar of service, avodah, which is tantamount to prayer. Service is prayer, avodah, which he was able to do miracles with, as in the story that we saw in Masechet Ta'anit. He did miraculous things with the sun and the rain, with his prayers. Ben Kabasavua, he exemplified the pillar of charity, tzedakah. And Ben Tzedakah exemplified the pillar of being scrupulous, very careful in the fulfilling of mitzvot. Right? That's similar to how the tzitzit is connected to mitzvot. Because by the tzitzit, in the Parashat Tzitzit, it says you shall remember all the mitzvot. That's why we have the tzitzit on. It reminds you of all the mitzvot of God. And there's hints to that in the knots and the number of strings and all that. So the issue was that despite their righteousness, there was great division between them and the sages. The sages wanted to negotiate peace with the Romans, but they wanted to rely on the walls of the city, whether the siege and outlast the Romans. They wanted to tolerate basically the siege. So that's what he says. He says these 3 tzaddikim disagree with the Chachamim of the time there. Chachamim wanted to go and negotiate with the Romans to end the war. These 3, they had a little bit of what we say, a little bit of a ga'ava, a little bit of a haughtiness thing, saying that we can outlast them, we can stay here, we have enough. And that was what caused the eventual problems, according to the Orach Yesharim.
Negotiating peace and outlasting the siege.
No. Negotiating peace would be to go and actually talk to the Romans, and that's like negotiate no more war. Don't kill anybody. Take the city. Just don't kill us.
Oh, take the city.
Yeah, of course. Just don't kill us. Negotiating their lives. The Romans were not going to give up anything. They weren't going to leave without Jerusalem. That's the fact. So, because the main thing is that the Jews were rebelling. It was rebellion. So they said, okay, we'll squash the rebellion. The Chachamim wanted to say, we'll squash the rebellion. You guys take over, put your people in, and that's it, fine. Just don't kill us and let us stay. That's what the sages wanted. But the Barionim wanted to say, no, let's go. We're not giving up a thing. We're going to fight tooth and nail till we kill every last Roman. And these 3 guys, according to the Orach Yesharim, wanted to say that, no, we can be neutral. We can stay where we are. We can outlast them. That's it. We don't have to fight. We don't have to negotiate. Stay where we are. Rely on us. We'll take care of you.
Outlast, meaning what? You're just going to pack and go home?
Yeah, that's how a siege works. Sieges are very serious.
Why don't they just leave and bring more reinforcements? Just keep substituting.
But they had walls. That's the thing. The walls were very serious. The point of the siege is again to starve the people inside. But they had enough for 21 years. So for Rome to leave to do a 21-year siege, it's unprecedented. I don't think it's ever happened. I don't know what the longest siege was ever. I don't think it's more than 3-4 years, maybe more than that. 21-year siege or more would cost a lot for the government, because these are all Roman people. These are all soldiers that you have to sustain, and you have to create supply lines to bring them food and water. It's a whole operation to run a siege. You understand what I'm saying? And you got to pay all these people. It's 21 years is like ridiculous. That's why they keep trying to break the walls down. Look at the history; it's very interesting stuff. Eventually, they did break the wall. They brought the battering rams. They made this ramp. They had these ballistic stones they used to throw and arrows. There was a whole system of how to break down a siege. Ancient warfare, very interesting stuff. Okay, Tiferet Shlomo. Next commentary. Tiferet Shlomo is written by Rabbi Shlomo ben Dov Tzvi Rabinowitz, 1800 to 1866. He writes this on his Sefer, on the Parsha, in Parashat Kitavo. He says that Ben Kalba Savua's name, from the guy from our Gemara, that was his name, because he had a strong passion to feed the hungry and the poor. Right? So Ben Kalba Savua, we said one of the explanations the Gemara gave was that if you came to his house like a kalba, which is a kelev, a dog, hungry like a dog, you would leave Savua, satiated. So he had a passion to feed the hungry, that heaven would ordain a miracle for anyone who entered his home to be so hungry as a kelev, as a dog, so that he could fulfill his longing to feed others. That's how he explains it. He says that he had such a strong passion to do the mitzvah of giving charity and food to people, that anyone who came to his house, even if they just ate, for example, they would come to his house feeling hungry. Miraculously. Why? Just so that he could fulfill his will of doing a mitzvah and giving food. That's how he explains it. Next one, Eshkol HaSofer. Rabbi Chaim Sofer, this is a lot of Chaim Sofer, this is one of the other ones. It's one of the less known books. It's called Eshkol HaSofer. He writes over here, Ben Kalba Savua's name can be explained, again, talking about Kalba Savua, same person, can be explained based on the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Tahorot 3:8 over there, which states that dogs are smart animals. Right? The word dog is in his name, Kalba. Since if they come across water and solid food, they will eat the solid food first, because water is easier to find, while solid food is more difficult to come by. Right? So if they find water and food, they're going to eat the food, because water is easier to find, apparently. Thus, Ben Kalba Savua would serve his guests a lot more solid food than water in order to better satiate them. That's how he connects it. Alternatively, his name can be understood based on the Gemara Masechet Beitzah 25b that says that the dog is the most brazen of all animals. Right? Brazen. Providing charity for a pauper, for a poor person who is ashamed and reserved, is easy. Right? Let's say you have a poor guy who's really upset, he's really embarrassed, he's asking for tzedakah, barely looking down, he doesn't want to take it, but he knows he has to. For that kind of person, it's easy to give, because he really needs it, he's not trying to take advantage. That's easy. But providing tzedakah, charity, for a pauper who is brazen and obnoxious, says, oh, give me money, God made you rich and made me poor, why should you give it to me? Cough it up. It's harder to give somebody like that money. Right? Nevertheless, Ben Kalba Savua was known to even feed those paupers who were brazen as dogs, asking for more and more without end. That's his praise, according to how he explains it here. That he even gave tzedakah to those paupers who acted like dogs, brazen like dogs, he gave it to them. That's how much he loved tzedakah. Ein Eliyahu, written by Rabbi Eliyahu Shik, is more of a modern commentary on the Gadot of the Gemara. He says, another version of Ben Tzitzit Keset's name, there's another, so we finished talking about Ben Kalba Savua, now we're talking about, okay, when it dies, it dies. I think so, yeah. Ben Tzitzit Keset. Another version of Ben Tzitzit Keset's name appears in the Avot de Rabbi Natan, where he writes, the last words that the last word instead of hakeset is hakesef. One letter change. If you drop the taf, put a pesofit at the end, you get the word hakesef, which means the silver. Tzitzit of the silver, instead of tzitzit of the cushion. Pointing to his wealth. Silver points to wealth, correct? In truth, these two versions of his name do not contradict each other. Both are true, says the Eliyahu. As it says in Masechet Shabbat 32b, anyone who is careful, scrupulous in the mitzvah of tzitzit, he merits to have 2,800 servants that will serve him. That's what the Gemara says, which must be referring to wealth, right? A lot of servants, that means you're wealthy. If you're wealthy, you have a lot of silver. So he says it all goes hand in hand. Kesed, kesef. We see from here that the mitzvah of tzitzit merits wealth, such as in the form of silver, and importance as well, such as his chair. That his chair will be amongst the greats and the elites. We said that. Okay, the next one is the Maharal, which is a lot. And I think it's best to save the Maharal for next week, also because our battery is dying, unfortunately. And we have Arabit soon anyway. So B'ezrat Hashem, next week we're going to start from the Maharal. He's going to give you a nice insight, a very deep insight on these three leaders and how they connect to the whole concept of three in general, as we'll see. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen, Amen.